Welcome to an Introduction to Economics, brought to you by David Hopcroft of Parkbench Tutors. This podcast introduces some simple concepts about supply. To view a full range of our podcasts, simply go to parkbenchtutors.com and sign up for our tutorials. Firms supply goods and services. For most firms in a market economy, this will take place under competitive conditions, and this podcast will make that assumption. The situation is different where there is a command economy or where the firm has a clear monopoly. The first concept to understand is market supply. Market supply of a good is a sum of all the quantities of that good that individual firms are willing and able to offer for sale over a given time period. Understanding the nature of supply is needed if firms are to plan, if they wish to estimate current and future revenues from sales of goods and services, and if they wish to estimate current and future production costs. In order to do this, any firm requires information. That information can then be used to determine how profitable it might be to increase the workforce, whether more capital should be employed, how much it will cost to buy more raw materials, and what is the likely future demand for the good or service. These are not easy, and the information needed must be reliable. Consider the decision about whether it would be more profitable to employ more workers. There is an existing wage level. Will new workers be prepared to work at this wage level? If not, and the wage level is increased, how does this affect the existing workforce? Would it be easier to offer more overtime to existing workers? How might this affect overtime rates to attract workers to work for longer hours? If the labour force belongs to a union and the firm has entered into agreements with the unions, then how will this affect any recruitment? What are the negotiations that are needed? How long will they take? Similarly, there are decisions needed before employing more capital. How much does the new plant cost, and if the money has to be obtained by means of a loan, then what will be the terms of that loan? The interest on the loan can be a factor for small firms seeking finance. Will the new machine have a useful lifespan? And what will be its output? What about the future demand for the product? Will this justify the investment? For firms using large quantities of raw materials, such as iron ore, steel, coal, or foodstuffs, there is a need to look at future prices. In the 1950s, British Rail seriously misjudged the price of oil when choosing not to invest in diesel locomotives. The price of coal rose and the price of oil fell. Now a different outlook might be necessary. For continued use of some raw materials, there must be new discoveries for sources of that raw material or alternatives to it found. How can a firm estimate future prices? What is the competition and how does this affect the price? How will family income affect demand? In a period of recession, the family income for many homes will fall, and this will affect demand of many goods seen as non-essential. It affects the demand for services. The travel industry usually sees a big fall in demand during a time of recession. Obviously, the supply will respond to that demand. What are the factors that we believe determine market supply? The first will be the objective of the firm. If the firm is attempting to maximize profits, or is the firm attempting to be objective and maximize sales revenue? To maximize sales revenue, then the objective is to aim to maximize total sales. We should not simply think that selling more means more profit. Most firms will not start to make a profit until a certain number of sales have been made. There are production costs that have to be met first. On the map, we show that a profit is made once sales revenues start to exceed total costs. This is where the green line for sales revenue starts to rise above the red line for costs. There will be a point at which profits will be greatest. This is shown as Q2 on the map. It is the point where the gap between total revenues and total costs is at its widest. Thereafter, profits will fall if costs continue to mount, as shown by considering the point Q2, where the gap between costs and revenues is much smaller. At a further point, where the red line for costs rises above the green line for sales revenue, then the firm would actually make a loss if it continued to produce the goods in those quantities. You may want to pause and consider why this should be so. To continue to produce the good might mean overtime is needed, which raises costs. There may only be a limited demand for the good. There may be other competitors who enter the market and reduce price, so sales revenues fall. What happens if the price of the good X rises? On this map, we have assumed that total costs will remain the same, and all that has happened is that price was raised to increase sales revenue. We can now see that maximum profit occurs at point Q3, where the sales revenue and costs are furthest apart. This would produce a new line for the profit, which is not shown here. If the price of related goods were to rise and X is unchanged, then we might expect sales of X to increase as it is substituted for Y by some consumers. However, will the firm producing Y now switch to producing X? What effect will this have on X? Is it possible to do this? A farmer may switch from growing beet to growing corn, but will have to wait until the next growing season. Consider the effect of reducing the price of automobiles. This may lead to an increase in demand for gasoline, so the price of gasoline may be raised. Automobiles and gasoline are considered to be complements. The price of one can affect the price of the other. Filling stations supply gasoline and diesel. These might be regarded as jointly supplied goods. How might the price of one affect the other? If the costs of production rise, then a firm may end up making a loss, and then the decision must be taken as to whether it should continue to produce good X. If it cannot continue to raise the price of X, then it will need to cease production, though this should not be a decision taken lightly. Accountants show the effect of stopping the production of one good may affect sales and profit, leading to something called a death spiral. To understand this, you should view our podcast on death spirals. Where there are changes in technology, these may reduce costs and increase profit margins. These changes have been very marked in the electronics field, with costs for producing LCD screens for televisions having fallen. We can sum up these factors by saying that the supply function is a function of B, the objectives of firms, Px, the price of good X, Pg, the price of related goods, Pf, the factors of production, T, the state of the technology, and Z, any other factors. Remember, the function sign here simply means that the supply depends upon these factors. Just as we plotted curves for demand, we can now do the same for supply, making use of our old friend ceteris paribus, meaning all other things are equal, or assuming all other factors stay the same. The supply curve for good X shows the relationship between the price of X and the quantities that firms are willing and able to sell at those prices. Now let us explore the relationship between the supply of X and the price of X. The table illustrates the quantity of X that will be supplied and the price that such a quantity will be supplied at. The graph that is plotted shows the typical market supply curve. Note that to be meaningful, then a time period for the quantity of X supplied will be needed. The change in the price of X is traced along the market supply curve. Now let us consider what happens if we change another factor that will influence this curve. We can see that the market supply curve shows a shift. You will recall similar curves when we considered demand. The question is, will the market supply curve shift to the left or to the right? If there is an improvement in technology, there should be a shift to the right. Supply of X will be increased. A rise in the factors of production will shift the curve to the left. A fall in those factors will shift the curve to the right. The supply curve shows the quantity producers are prepared to supply at a price for X over a given period of time. At point 1, suppose the actual market price is P1. At point 2, suppose it is P2, and so on. The area above the price curve, but below the price line P0A, is a gain that is referred to as the producer's surplus. Just as we talked of elasticity of demand, we can also refer to elasticity of supply. The definition is similar. Price elasticity of supply is calculated as the proportionate change in the quantity supplied divided by the proportionate change in the price. Delta Q divided by Q is the proportionate change in quantity supplied. Delta P supplied by P is the proportionate change in the price. If ES, the elasticity of supply, is less than 1, then the supply is inelastic. A given percentage change in the price will cause a smaller percentage change of quantity supplied. If ES is greater than 1, then the supply is elastic. A given percentage change in price causes a greater percentage in the quantity supplied. If ES equals 0, then a fixed quantity will be supplied at any price. The price is said to be perfectly inelastic. If ES equals 1, the supply is perfectly elastic. Nothing will be supplied below OP1. With unitary supply elasticity, the percentage change in elasticity of price is exactly equal to the percentage change in price. Any straight line supply curve that passes through the origin has an elasticity of 1. The quantity of good produced by a firm can be altered, but the time required for the alteration can depend on a number of factors. In a very short time, known as the momentary period, then the supply makes use of increases by reducing any unsold stocks. In the short run, we can increase supply by using overtime, having employees work longer hours. In the long run, then all the factors can be varied, including construction of new factories. On the map for supply curves, S3 shows the long-run curve, S2 the short-run curve, and S1 the perfectly inelastic curve. A short-run increase is often made by using excess capacity, that is, bringing into use any unused plant or underfunctioning plant or unused labour. To make changes over the long run, then we are considering questions of how to shift production. This may not always be easy. Labour may be reluctant to move. Firms may need to bring in immigrant labour. There may be a need to retrain labour or recruit trained labour. Plant may also need to be replaced. This ends our short podcast on supply, brought to you by Park Bench Tutors and narrated by David Hopcroft. Thank you for watching and listening. We wish you every success in your studies. For more information on Park Bench Tutors, visit parkbenchtutors.com.